Ladies and gentlemen, can I invite you to take your seats? We're about to begin. And welcome to the Evans Theatre here at Panthers. My name is Greg Elliott. I'm Director Wellbeing at Catholic Education, Diocese of Parramatta, and I'm delighted to be your MC this evening. It feels as though we're at an important part in our history of reconciliation in this country. This past couple of days, there has been the announcement of the first steps towards, hopefully, the recognition of our First Nations people in our Constitution. And so it is fitting that we begin this evening by acknowledging that we are on the sacred lands of the Darug people.
Budiri Malinawal,
Warami Wallabalami Garambarak, Diagiara Jamaica,
and Shania, Ingara Darugotiam. Nayanurawa, Wangunura, Jinmagangu Manura.
Daragiora, Yanmala, Uburia, Udangara, Gunyulungalung.
Titirigora, Yanajanawi, Bubulingami.
Hello everyone, it's good to see you wherever you have travelled from today. My name is Jamaica.
And my name is Shania, and we're Darug, Dangari, and Gumbangi women.
This is our country, our mother's country, the country of our grandmothers, grandfathers, and ancestors.
Our people have walked on and cared for this country for more than 80,000 years. So thank you for walking with us today and strengthening our spirit.
And on behalf of our people, welcome to Darug country.
Yamagaranginda, Ngaygayar Manjabaraba. Hello, how are you? My name is Manjambaraba. My birth name is Alkira Field. I come from the lands of the Gumori people, the people of the Red Sands. I'd like to acknowledge the Wangal people of the Darug Nation, of the lands on which I stand upon. And on behalf of CEDP, I would like to pay my respects to the Darug people and the Gundungurra people, as their country is where our schools and our offices reside. I'd like to pay my respects to the ancestors of the now, then, and the future. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders who pass on the knowledge we need to care for country and continue our living culture. I'd also like to pay my respects to the trees that sway to the sound of the winds, to the waterways that nourish our roots, to the animals that walk beside us on the sands our feet leave footprints on, and to the stars in the skies that guide our ways and tell us the stories of our dreaming. As we take our next footsteps on the lands of country, may we walk together in unity and in the footprints of our ancestors. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
And as we gather this evening, let us gather in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Help us to recognise the evil intent in communication that does not build communion. Help us to remove the venom from our judgments. Help us to speak about others as our brothers and sisters. You are faithful and trustworthy. May our words be seeds of goodness for the world. Where there is shouting, let us practice listening. Where there is confusion, let us inspire harmony. Where there is ambiguity, let us bring clarity. Where there is exclusion, let us offer solidarity. Where there is sensationalism, let us use sobriety. Where there is superficiality, let us raise real questions. And where there is prejudice, let us awaken trust. Where there is hostility, let us bring respect. And where there is falsehood, let us bring truth. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Can I invite you to stand for our national anthem that will be sung first in the local Darug language and then in English.
Iara Maria la Biblia, inyana goyang gari, yara gabyang bumbu bungana, inyana gargareng waru, birenga wati mara, gara-gara wara buiri, yala manji waru berenga, jangan bulu iora, waru bugi berenga, karo beri iora, waru bugi berenga, karo beri iora.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth of toil, our home is girt by the sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, and let us sing advance Australia
Thank you. Please be seated. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight, and I would especially like to acknowledge our special guests this evening. These include many senior leaders from the Diocese of Parramatta, the Very Reverend Chris D'Souza, Episcopal Vicar for Education and Formation, the Very Reverend Peter Williams, Vicar for Clergy and Moderator of the Curia, members of the Curia, Mr. Jeff Officer, Chief Operations and Finance for the Diocese, senior leaders of diocesan agencies and ministries, Sister Mary Louise Petro, Congregational Leader, Mercy Sisters, Parramatta, Father Tim Brennan from the National Protection and Prevention Office, the Reverend Bill Cruz from the Reverend Bill Cruz Foundation, Father Brian Lucas, National Director of Australian Catholic Mission, Dr. Hugh McDermott, MP, Member for Prospect, Councillor Nathan Sempronio, representing Hawkesbury Council, the Directors of Catholic Education and other CDP colleagues, principals and staff of our 80 great schools, Ms. Maria Nicholson, a Director of the newly incorporated board for Parramatta, and to anyone I may have missed. To all our guests, one and all, you are very welcome. I welcome you to the 2022 Anne D. Clark Lecture. This lecture is held in honour of the first Executive Director of Schools in the Diocese of Parramatta, Ms. Anne Clark. Anne, who was appointed as the Foundation Executive Director in 1987 and held this position until her death in 1997. Anne was a visionary leader who charted a forward-thinking educational agenda which we continue to build on today. The purpose of the Anne D. Clark Lecture is to stretch our imagination as we listen to thought leaders share their insights with local educators and guests. Each year, the Executive Director, Greg Whitby, extends an invitation to an acclaimed educational expert or community leader to share with us their thoughts on education, community, and how we can make the society we live in and share a better place. We continue in that tradition by inviting Rev Tim Costello, who will present to us We Can Make the World We Share Fairer and More Equitable with Strong Ethical Leadership. There is a strong list of eminent speakers who have delivered the Anne D. Clark Lecture in the past. These include our own Bishop, Bishop Vincent, Professor Patrick Griffin, Professor Yong Zhao, Professor Brian Caldwell, Professor Andy Hargraves, Professor Stephen Dinham, Professor Peter Hill, John Hattie, Vivian Robinson, Michael Fullen, Janice Reid, Louise Stoll, Frank Brennan, and Senator Patrick Dodson. But tonight is special because we have been trying to get Tim here for the past 3 years. Unfortunately, due to public health orders and COVID restrictions, that's been difficult until tonight. And even tonight, the recent increase in COVID cases in the community, many who would otherwise be with us in person tonight are joining us online, and you are also very welcome this evening. A few words about our very special guest tonight. Rev Tim Costello AO directs Ethical Voice and is one of Australia's most respected community leaders and a sought-after voice on social justice issues, leadership and ethics. For 13 years, until October 2016, Rev Costello was Chief Executive of World Vision Australia. He then completed over 2 years as World Vision Australia's Chief Advocate. Currently, Tim remains as Executive Director of MICA Australia and continues to place the challenges of global poverty on the national agenda. He is Senior Fellow for the Centre for Public Christianity, and he remains a spokesperson for the Alliance for Gambling Reform, which campaigns for law reform to prevent harm from poker machine gambling. Other positions he holds in his spare time: Chair of the Community Council of Australia, Chief Advocate for Thriving Communities, Partnership and Patron of the National Youth Commission. In 2006, Rev Costello was named Victoria's Australian of the Year. In 2005, was made Officer of the Order of Australia. In 2004, was Victorian of the Year. And in 1997, was named one of Australia's 100 National Living Treasures. And in 2019, Rev Costello released his personal memoir, A Lot with a Little, which is published by Hardy Grant. I'd like to invite Greg Whitby to welcome our guest.
Well, by my reckoning, by the time I'm finished, Tim, you'll have 7 minutes. What a wonderful introduction. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we gather and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, for the wonderful stewardship of this great south land of ours. It was absolutely amazing to look at the images from the Northern Territory and hear the commitment that our Prime Minister's made for something that's so simple but is so important to our nation, and a great sense of maturity of purpose, and I'm forever thankful to hear those words. I just want to acknowledge all those special guests, but particularly our special guest, Tim. As you've heard, Tim holds a record in waiting 2 years before he could come to centre stage. So we're very thankful that each year, as we rang and said, look, we can't do it, he's here with us today. Also, I want to, making an apology for our bishop, as you've just heard, who's interstate for a funeral. The Vicar General's here to represent our bishop. To the other special guests and good friend of Catholic education, Brian Lucas, you are also welcome. And to all my colleagues with whom I work, and for you, I finally want to say for you who've come out in some strength for this important occasion. I look forward to your presentation, Tim.
Thank you, Greg. Would you please welcome to the stage our special guest, Rev Tim Costello.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. It's pretty much as I wrote it, really. A delight to be here. Judging by my Irish Catholic name, should be a Catholic. In fact, it was a near miss. My father was baptised Catholic. He wanted to play for the best cricket team where he grew up. Unfortunately, that happened to be a Protestant cricket team, so he ended up becoming a Protestant and marrying my mother, and we were brought up Baptist. It's funny the intersections that I continue to have. I met Archbishop Tim Costello of Perth just about 4 years ago. We had not met before, but over dinner he said, "I can't tell you how much you've ruined my life." And I said, "What? What have I done?" He said, "Well, when I became a bishop in Victoria, even the Catholic paper said we have secured the CEO of World Vision Australia to be the next Catholic Archbishop." He said, I had a Catholic saying to me, "I love the Pope." "Oh, yes." Archbishop Tim said, "Why do you love the Pope?" "So courageous." "Oh, yes." "What do you like about his courage?" "Well, fancy the Pope appointing you a Baptist as a Catholic Archbishop." Anyway, I am very delighted to be here. I have enormous respect for the Catholic sector in education. The remarkable thing in education generally, certainly in the Catholic education system, is how so many people, not of Catholic faith, not of particularly Christian faith, say, "Look at those schools, look at those values. I want my child to have something of that." There is some deep hunger of parents for what you have. I have respect for all teachers. In being personal here, my father was a teacher, my mother was a teacher. When I finished a law degree, I thought, well, the family script is teaching. I went off and then did a diploma of education. 6 weeks of teacher training convinced me law was a very good idea. I say that because I found it really hard to stand up in front of a class, to maintain discipline, to have a responsibility to teach kids at different levels is extraordinarily complex. My son is a teacher, my wife is a teacher, my sister is a teacher. I actually feel a failure being a lawyer, and now a clergyman, and now some other things. It is incredibly difficult. And it's difficult because in recent days, with a fragmenting society, with government trying desperately to find the levers to actually pull, to have an influence, in my judgment, what they've downloaded onto schools, the one funnel through which all children go, whether it's state or religious or private education, the one funnel is schools. So they've downloaded drug education and suicide prevention and drinking and driving and mental health, and what society once knew was its responsibility, with a whole range of other civic organisations, I think unfairly has been downloaded onto teachers. My son, who teaches in a Christian school, he says to me, "Dad, the expectations of parents, they come at me because I mark down their special child." Well, special? Every child of my own is special. Every child of another parent is special. Their special child. For not grading them in the right way, the anger, the expectation, the brittleness. This is incredible. It is this extraordinary pressure that has been placed on schools. When I did a dip ed long ago, I sort of failed to step up to the mark. I took the easy road, law and then ministry. It's got even harder. It has got even harder. I take off my hat. And I find it quite amazing just the sort of financial rewards that we pay in society. You know, when you ask parents why they're both working hard, they'll commonly say to give our kids the best chance in life. That drives them. That makes the reason for why they work hard. Excuse me. If we then say, and what is it, that is the best for your child, they'll commonly say this: it's the best education. And they'll have aspirations of a private sector school. And I go, well, if this is actually what's driving so many parents in working hard, why, when we know that the quality of teachers is what makes for the best schools, the culture of a school that is built is what makes for the best schools, why aren't we paying teachers more than hedge fund managers and Macquarie bankers? Why are we rewarding this when this is the engine that actually drives parental energy, anxiety, hard work? So I seriously mean it when I say I take my hat off to teachers. Well, today I want to talk to you in this lecture about the stories we tell. Ivan Illich, a great activist, was once asked, what's the most profound way to change society? Is it revolution? Do you work out the 30 or 50 most powerful, richest people in society and kidnap them, lock them up, cut off their heads, redistribute their wealth, have a revolution? No, he said it's not that. Is it reformation? Incrementally, do you seize the commanding heights of politics and business and education and health and quietly, incrementally have a reformation? Illich said, well, maybe, but probably not. He said, if you want to change society, tell an alternative story. The gospel is that alternative story. And through this lecture, I want to contrast the alternative story that the gospel tells, that Catholic education is committed to, with what's become the dominant story in our culture. In thinking of the dominant story, you only have to think back to 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell and Fukuyama declared the end of history. Now, liberal democratic capitalism would have no opposition. We would move effortlessly to greater freedom, greater equity, greater democratic participation. It would happen. George H. Bush, president at the time, promised a peace dividend. With the end of the Cold War, we could take massive military budgets, we could funnel them into education and health, and we would see a greater equality and prosperity. The only country in the world I know that abolished its defence force was Costa Rica. Kids should actually spend money on books, not guns. The president looked around and said, who's going to attack us? Costa Rica, by the way, did that, and they have some of the best educational outcomes. They haven't been attacked and overcome. But basically, at the end of 1989, the dominant story was progress. We now are on an inevitable track to greater progress and equality and peace. That was the hope, the dominant story. What we saw instead was a profound retribalising. ISIS and the disappointments of the Arab Spring, Tahrir Square, and what then trickled out with that hope that we can actually overcome autocracy and theocratic rule was smashed. We saw waves of refugees around the world, not just coming to Australia, but particularly across the Mediterranean, failed states like Libya, poverty, autocracy, authoritarianism, and the pushback of fear about that. And most recently, of course, the pandemic. The pandemic has claimed more than 6 million lives, probably underreported, probably nearer to 10 to 15 million, disrupting global health, global economic, global education systems, businesses and societies, upending literally billions of lives. And we're feeling the shockwaves, the weighty geopolitical challenges caused by the spread of COVID-19. Global poverty has increased for the first time in a generation, and income losses among vulnerable, disadvantaged populations has led to a dramatic rise in inequality within Australia and Western nations and across nations. Over the past 2.5 years, the world economy has shrunk by 4 to 7%. The dominant story was prosperity and progress and greater equity. That was an enlightenment sort of promise. And here we had a moment, it seems. Yep, the opposite. Disruption in every area, global social and healthcare systems, devastating impacts on women, children, the aged, people with disabilities, youth and Indigenous. And in mental health, you know as teachers that kids, and I come from Melbourne, longest lockdown anywhere in the world, the mental health of kids who've missed what makes school wonderful. Sport, celebrations of theatre and drama and musicals and presentation nights. For 2 years in Victoria, they're missing out. For young kids, the mental health shock of not being there with your friends, of missing those milestones. To be a single mum in a housing commission, kids fighting over access on a computer because you're poor, to classes on Zoom, quite devastating in terms of the educational setbacks. Ruthlessly exposing the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, within and without country. Well, just this morning I've been in Canberra doing a press conference with Micah Australia. Caritas are a member of Micah Australia, and with the Caritas CEO, Kirsty Robinson, and a few other CEOs, talking about the F word being back, famine. 60 million people now suffering famine because of the knock-on of climate change and failure of seasons and rain in the Horn of Africa and conflict. Ukraine, the bread belt of the world, and conflict. Famine is red alert, code alert in international development. It takes a lot to declare famine. Acute hunger, 350 million people now in acute hunger, particularly in the Horn of Africa and Afghanistan, because of climate change and conflict, particularly the Russian conflict. 800 million who go to bed hungry each night. If famine is red code alert, acute hunger's orange, and yet we continue with nearly 1 billion people with going to bed hungry. Well, this is inequality profoundly rising. A death of at least one person every 4 seconds now from hunger. It's the war in Ukraine, it's climate change, and against this we have seen in the pandemic the rich massively getting richer. Remember, liberal democracy after 1989 was the promise of greater equality. For a while that did happen. From 2000 to 2015, the Millennium Development Goals, which gave a global focus to poverty, first time we put poverty in a human rights framework, we actually saw famine, hunger being pushed back. When we say, oh, it's always been here, no, under the MDGs for 15 years, we made remarkable progress. There was that hope, progress, optimism happening. But with the pandemic, this has all been turned back. The rich getting richer is quite extraordinary in the global pandemic. The wealth of the world's 10 richest men has doubled since the pandemic began. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, founder of Tesla and 9 other richest billionaires, have collectively grown wealthier by $1.3 billion a day between March 2020 and October 2021. The 10 richest men own 6 times the wealth of the bottom 40% of the world's population, 3.1 billion people. The pandemic blew out inequality. The incomes of 99% of humanity are worse off because of COVID-19. This is a picture of the dominant story of progress going wrong. When it comes to vaccine apartheid, Micah Australia had a campaign, End COVID for All. Caritas and many others were part of this campaign. It was a campaign saying 72% of people in high-income countries have been vaccinated with at least one dose of the vaccine. Only 17% of people in low-income countries have been vaccinated. A UN official called it vaccine apartheid. Rich countries like Australia bought 5 times the vaccines of our entire population. Other countries did the same. End COVID for All had some modest gains of seeing the Morrison government increase vaccine sharing in the Indo-Pacific. But inequality when it comes to vaccines. Well, one of the dominant storylines is that humans are just profit-maximising machines, that they exist to actually maximise happiness. Put another way, it is the wealthier I am, the happier I'll be. There is truth in that. If you're a parent who's desperately poor and you cannot guarantee for your children what other kids in your neighbourhood have, if you're in the developing world, you can't guarantee enough calories and clean water for your children, let alone an education. You aren't happy. You feel moral panic and failure as a parent. There is truth that if you are wealthier when you are poorer, it does lead to greater happiness. But this we also know. Greater wealth, particularly in our societies, over about $90,000, $100,000 a year per annum income, doesn't lead to greater happiness. It leads to greater restlessness, drivenness, anxiety about how I'm doing, and stress. Well, a free society like ours rests upon 3 legs of a stool. It certainly rests upon free markets. The individual putting into the market their consumer preferences, the market brilliantly, invisibly organising the allocation of resources, the creation of consumer goods to meet what we want. That's one leg. A free society depends upon also democracy, one person, one vote, and free elections, and that individual's dignity for their voice to be heard. That is the great achievement of democratic societies. The third leg of a free society is morality. Morality or ethics, they're synonyms really, is this. Morality is about us, not I. Morality is about we, not me. Morality is about concern for the common good. Morality is underscored by service of others, thinking of others. Morality in the Catholic, Christian, Judeo ethic comes from an alternative story, the gospel story, that God made us in his image. That whenever I am encountering another human, whatever their socio-economic background, their disabilities, their power, their IQ, whenever I'm encountering another human, I am having an encounter with God. Something of God. Morality at that level is selflessness. It is the third pillar to a free society. When we see it with people who volunteer, not because they can make a profit, they're not being paid, not because they're politically told they have to do it, government, politics. Government doesn't tell you to volunteer, to give, to serve, to love. But that morality is the glue that makes up a free society. The alternative story that Catholic educators teach is that morality is fundamental for a free society. It's got to be modelled and celebrated. It's got to be formed in formation, that other humans, whatever their background, colour, sexuality, IQ, disability, have something of God. Now, we're not sure what the image of God is. Some people say it's freedom against animals. Humans are free to create culture, to create in a way that changes destiny. Some say it's conscience. The image of God is knowing right or wrong. Some say it's responsibility. Theologians might argue over it, but that image of God is about profound dignity. And it's contested. The wealth profit maximising story actually says, well, those who are entrepreneurial and those who are smarter should be given the greater honours and say and power. Catholic education resists that. That's just a nicer Nietzschean form of what Nietzsche put very crudely in declaring God is dead, in saying that Christianity is a slave morality. Why? Because it privileges those who are weak and vulnerable and deficient. He extolled the Greco-Roman ethics of excellence and strength and outstanding ability in saying even the wicked and strong are more excellent and are to be celebrated than the vulnerable and the weak. Christianity and its compassion for the vulnerable is a slave morality. When we come to the test of morality, it's even linked with capitalism, at least moral capitalism. The moral philosopher Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations said, "You can't create shared value, profit, without shared values." The focus, he said, is not on doing the next right thing, but rather doing the next right thing and the next right thing coming out of values. Even conservative side of politics would agree with this. Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, said, what society is a contract, a covenant with those who lived before, with the present, and with the living. Think climate change. True conservatives see it is a contract, a covenant, not just for our needs, but with future generations. Well, the world needs ethical leadership to underscore this alternative story, to understand that ethics, morality is that glue of what makes us a free society. And Catholic education, never underestimate this, is a fundamental part of the alternative story, that God sees all, loves all, reaches out in his grace to all, whatever their status. How did the early Christian church turn the known world upside down in those first 200 years? They cared not just for Christians, but for the pagans in the Greco-Roman world, with hospitals and healthcare in pandemics. Christians who were wealthy could escape, as all the great and rich did, from a pandemic when a city was gripped by it. They chose to stay and care and minister, often dying. They had this advantage. Two advantages. They believed the image of God was in those people who were so poor they couldn't escape the city and couldn't escape the pandemic. They believed God was in those people. Secondly, they believed in the resurrection. What does the resurrection mean? Ethically, it means I don't have to squeeze every experience, every advancement, every success into this life as if this is the only life I have. Resurrection says there is something beyond. So I can sacrifice, I can serve, I can be selfless, I can give of myself rather than squeezing everything in now. The early church didn't, I think, just have better preachers. We've got better preachers today. They didn't just have better doctrine. We're always trying to cross the T and dot the I. The church never gets its act together on doctrine. Am I offending the Vicar General? But anyway, the church is always fighting over doctrine. No, what they had was this novel, unprecedented ethic that matched their preaching of resurrection that said, we love, we stay, we care. We care for slaves and girls who in Greco-Roman society, it was totally acceptable to leave a girl to die out on the hills, abandoned, killed by wolves, infanticide practice. There was no dishonour in that. They were just a girl. The passe sexual ethics that the Christian church is often accused of today, those sexual ethics in the first 200 years were incredibly liberating for women. Men owned women's bodies. Masters owned women's bodies. And the result of sex, abortion, infanticide was their problem. Women had no rights. Christian churches teaching commitment in marriage, teaching no premarital sex because you didn't actually have many other options if you're a powerless woman to deal with what happened, were protective mechanisms giving dignity and protection to women. That's why so many women actually joined the church. This was a novel, unprecedented protective ethic. Well, the alternative story is a story that focuses on we are made in God's image. We will swim counter to the tide. We will stand up for those who society treats as vulnerable, even victims. You know, it's fascinating to me to read the writings of a secular historian, Tom Holland. He's written a brilliant book, Dominion. It's all about the cross and how it reversed the values of Western culture. And Western culture lives and breathes the values of the cross and Christianity without really any idea of where its values come from, having completely lost the story, thinking it all started in the Enlightenment. Tom Holland in the book talks about, in the 10th and 11th century, the Catholic jurists who embodied the first imprint of canon law and human rights. They, not later Thomas Paine and others, were the first to really say human rights as a developed system, a law that is transcendent and above, was starting to be developed. Tom Wright actually says in his book Dominion that even the notion of victimhood, how we have often sadly a race to victimhood, claiming it, is actually a legacy of Christian faith. God in Christ was the victim on the cross. If you said to a Greco-Roman, you've got to listen to me because I'm a victim and that's unfair, the Greco-Romans would have laughed and said, yeah, you are a victim, we're going to crucify you. They didn't care. This notion that God sides with the victim is a profound... Now, Jesus didn't then entrench victimhood, always come claiming it. He forgave those who crucified him. But the privileging of victims says Christian faith is an ethical perspective from the perspective of the vulnerable and the victim. That is a complete revolution compared to any other culture. And a secular historian, Tom Holland, really paints that out. Well, the alternative story is a story about small mustard seeds. In the shallow waters of Shark Bay, Western Australia, marine scientists were stunned in May this year when they realised a seagrass meadow measuring 180 kilometres long had started as a single plant and spread by cloning itself over the last 4,500 years. Researchers who just published their findings in Proceedings of the Royal Society said that makes it the single largest plant known to exist on Earth. It started with a single seed. In 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul tells us that God supplies the seed for us to sow in order to produce thanksgiving to God. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. Seeds. Pope Benedict said, I have a mustard seed and I'm not afraid to use it. The alternative story is just a mustard seed, but it's a counter-cultural story of what might grow. In 1737, 26-year-old Moravian missionary George Schmidt arrived on the shores of Cape Town, South Africa, 1737. He moved to Bavianskloof, Kloof, the Valley of the Baboons, set up the first Protestant mission station in southern Africa, built himself a home, planted a tiny pear tree shoot in his new garden. George Schmidt befriended and educated a small group of displaced Khoi people, taught them to farm so they wouldn't go hungry. After 5 years of educating the community and sharing his faith, he baptised the first new followers of Jesus. News of baptisms upset some in the state church. It led to his departure from South Africa in 1744, just 6 years after his arrival. He felt he had failed. 50 years later, after Schmidt had died, a new generation of Moravian missionaries returned to South Africa. They located the ruin of Schmidt's original house. In the garden, to their amazement, stood a giant pear tree, the results of that tiny shoot that Schmidt had planted. They met an old woman named Magdalena. She introduced herself as one of the original believers who'd been baptised 50 years previously. This remarkable woman had matured and led the indigenous church which Schmidt had founded. She drew out of a small leather bag something that only her daughter could read, because she was now blind. It was a New Testament. They listened astonished as this second-generation native believer read to them from a Bible given by Schmidt 5 decades earlier. George Schmidt didn't have to be present for the sapling he'd planted to grow into a pear tree, nor did he need to be in South Africa. The gospel seed he'd sown had grown into a thriving church. God had been present, sustaining, growing the first shoots of life. Well, the next generation of Moravian missionaries continued George Schmidt's work. They developed a self-sufficient, literate agricultural community with a spiritual life. Within a decade, the governor of the region was so impressed with the impact of the Valley of Baboons, he named it Genadendal, which means Valley of Grace. In 1995, in recognition of its remarkable history, Nelson Mandela, president, changed the name of the official residence of the President of South Africa from Westbrook to Genadendal, Valley of Grace. In making this announcement, he said, I want the office of President to always be under God's grace. George Schmidt planted a pear tree and planted the gospel back then in 1737. Well, one of the other stories of the dominant culture is the story If we're not profit maximising, we're pleasure and happiness maximising machines. That's who we're made to be. Many of you will know that Father Adolfo Nicolas, Superior General of the Jesuits, spoke to Jesuit educators in 2010 about what he called the globalisation of superficiality. He said, when one can access so much information so quickly, so painlessly, when one can express and publish to the world one's reactions so immediately, so unthinkingly, in one's blogs or microblogs, when the latest opinion column from the New York Times or the newest viral video can be spread so quickly to people half a world away, shaping their perceptions and feelings, then the laborious, painstaking work of serious critical thinking often gets short-circuited. When beautiful images from the merchants of consumer dreams flood one's computer screens, when ugly or unpleasant sounds of the world can be shut out by one's MP3 music player, then one's vision, one's perception of reality, one's desiring also remains shallow. You're overwhelmed with dizzying pluralism of choices, of values, beliefs, visions of life, rather than engaging in the hard work of forming communities of dialogue, searching for truth and understanding. Pleasure, superficiality, shortcuts. This is a dominant story your kids are living in. You'll know the name Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He wrote so much in his book Ethics about the way people worship success and pleasure. He referred to it in his letter from Barcelona, the fickleness of crowds at bullfights. They roared for the toreador one moment and then for the bull the next. It was success they wanted, success more than anything else. So he said in Ethics, Bonhoeffer, a world where success is the measure, where success is the justification of things. The figure of him who is sentenced and crucified remains a stranger and is best an object of pity. The world will allow itself to be subdued only by success. It's not ideas or opinions which decide, he said. It's not deeds, it's just success that justifies wrongs done. We're seeing Putin demanding Ukraine having its Golgotha because he wants success for Mother Russia. I had a hour and a half's meeting with Putin in 2013 in his dacha outside Moscow. I was leading Civil Society 20, part of the G20. We had this extraordinary exchange over Syria, over why he was closing down Russian charities under the Foreign Agents Law. Most fascinating was because he was wearing a cross. He was fascinated I was a reverend. He said, I'm telling Russians to go back to church. I'm giving 3,000 rubles, millions of rubles, and we're building, in the last year, 3,000 Orthodox churches. He said, young Russians only have materialism in their lives. They need God. I'm listening, thinking I can't really fault this. But an ex-KGB agent. And then he said something that really amazed me. He said, I believe the West is completely lost and I want to defend Christianity. I pushed my luck a bit. He had the TV cameras in there. So I saw myself on Moscow TV that night. And I said, well, that's great, but why did you send Pussy Riot to Siberia? He said, well, they offended the church, singing St. Saviour's, Christ the Cathedral. It's blasphemous. We're not having that. I said, yeah, I know. But, I said, even though it was blasphemous, surely the church would say the gospel teaches us to forgive. We believe in forgiveness. Don't send them to Siberia. A look of utter incomprehensibility came over Putin's face, and he said, "Why would a church ever say that?" I realised the Russian church had become a department of the state. Millions of rubles, but a yes man to Putin. Putin needs success. It trumps all ethics and the murderous rage that he is going on with. This culture of maximising success, of pleasure, of happiness, we know God is not interested in success, but in obedience, in faithfulness. The classic tale of how money doesn't buy wealth is J.D. Rockefeller. You probably know the story. 55, relentless, massively rich, marriage breaking up, unhappy, not seeing his kids, stopped with a journalist's question, "How much money, Mr. Rockefeller, does it take to make a man happy?" Rockefeller said, "Just a little more. Just a little more." Well, the alternative story says we're not profit maximising, we're not pleasure, happiness, success maximising, we are meaning maximising. I don't quite understand how people from secular, atheistic backgrounds don't understand this. You see, they might go, "But we've got science." Absolutely, science explains the world that is. But I scarcely meet a human who's happy with the world that is. As soon as you move to the world that ought to be, you're into faith, and faith in a story to change that world, like the gospel, the alternative story that I'm talking about. Science can explain the world that is, but even secularists have to have faith in an alternative story. You can't cut anyone open and find, you can find heart, liver, whatever, but you can't find human rights. But we all believe in human rights, or a soul for that matter. You actually have to have a story about why humans might have soul and human rights. It takes faith to believe that story. This is what meaning is about. Saying, what is the story I indwell? Australia is just starting, and I love the introduction tonight, to embark on saying, what would it be like to indwell a story of 65,000 years of continuous culture in this country? We're starting at least to lean into that story, to imagine that story. We haven't lived that culture. It takes faith and imagination to actually say, but that story has authenticity and it can help locate me. Well, the alternative story is the quest for meaning. Mark Twain said, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you found out why. In year 12, I'm sure some of you have parents like my mum, have kids who are in year 12. My mum took me aside. She said, now Tim, your father and I want you to go to university. We want you to really study hard. And I immediately had this picture of, okay, year 12's that first rung on the ladder of career and success. Well, I studied hard. I did well enough to get into law at Monash. My family was so thrilled, they took the whole family out to celebrate at a Chinese restaurant. There were toasts, and afterwards, my mother took me aside. We're so proud of you. Fancy getting into law at Monash. Then she said, but now, Tim, you really have to study hard. And when I said why, she said, well, not everyone who gets a law degree actually gets articles at the end, only those with a good law degree. You've got to study hard. I'm going, okay. The next rung on the ladder, there's year 12, is now getting a good law degree. I had a great time at university, and at the end of 5 years, after doing a dip ed, I got articles. My family was so thrilled, they took the whole family out to celebrate at the same Chinese restaurant. By then I had a younger brother doing law. You would never have heard of him. And after the celebrations, my mother took me aside. She said, "We're so proud of you. Fancy getting articles. Dad and I are so proud of you. But now, Tim, you really have to work hard." And when I said why, she said, "Not everyone who gets articles gets kept on. Only those who really work hard." I thought, here's the next rung on the ladder. And I had this vision, more rungs. If I get kept on, which I did, I'll be an associate. Maybe then I'll be a partner, corner office, more money, nice car, more social status. This is what the career of life is. Well, the meaning, alternative story, says there's another ladder. Nothing wrong with that career ladder. That ladder is called vocation. Voca, Latin word for calling. The first rung of that ladder is when you say, why am I even here? Or as Mark Twain says, work out why I'm here. Well, in Christian faith, it says we're not just a biological freak in a cosmic zoo. There wasn't just some random atoms. We are made in God's image. I remember sitting in the gutter when I was later in years set up Urban Seed, running a detox centre, caring for homeless, heroin addicted in Collins Street, Melbourne at the Baptist Church. We'd started Urban Seed. I'm sitting in a gutter with a heroin addict trying to convince him to get into our detox centre. And I say words that just rolled off my tongue very, very easily. I said, you know what? I think God made you. What surprised me was he burst into tears. Initially I thought, oh, he's not religious, I've offended him, I shouldn't have said that. Then through the tears he said, blubbering, God made me? He said, my old man told me I'm just an accident. He's hardly been in my life. He hasn't really wanted me. I just always felt like an accident. God made me. Here was a novel thought on that first rung of the vocation career ladder. God made me. You mean I am here for a reason? The second rung, I think, on the career meaning ladder is when you say, well, God, why am I here? I think you answer that question, you help your students answer that question by saying, well, what are you passionate about? What do you love? What do you lose all track of time? I'm not talking about Facebook here. And it might be their music, their art, their mentoring, their coaching, their volunteering, whatever it is. The God who made me gave me great passions. I think that one of the great theologians, Buchner, put it beautifully. He said, your calling, your passion is where your need your bliss, your happiness intersects with the world's need. Isn't that beautiful? Your bliss intersects with the world's need. Other ways to answer that question on that rung, why am I here, is to say, what is it that if I don't do it, I'm going to be poorer and the world is going to be poorer? It's not just all about me. Kierkegaard said the door to true happiness turns outwards. The world is going to be poorer if I don't do this. For me, it was always the question of justice. That's why I did law. I ended up realising law was just about time costing and money and business. And I got out, did ministry and ended up CEO, but it was always justice. It started in high school, year 9, where I asked a really good question. I asked a really good question. How do I know? The teacher in year 9 told me I'd asked a really good question. The teacher surprised me by saying, that's a really good question. The teacher surprised me more by saying, I don't know the answer. I thought teachers knew the answer. The question basically was, Is poverty natural or is poverty created? If it's natural, you can't really overturn nature. But if poverty is created because of the rules we make and politics, well, we can rewrite the rules. We can change politics. That teacher said to me, out of class time, let's work on reading together and discussing how to answer that question. I was blown away. That teacher changed my life. I have stayed close to that question of justice in everything I've done since. It started in year 9. Never underestimate the impact you as a teacher can have on young people. Well, that rung of the vocation ladder is this sense. I'm here for a reason. What is it that if I don't do it, I'll be poor and the world will be poorer? I hope that for you as teachers, that rung with the career ladder overlaps. Fancy being paid for the thing you're called to do. I hope that's the case. For a lot of people, it's not like that. Sometimes when you're offered a rise on the career ladder, it comes right at the time where you are going to have to spend more time at work and miss out on coaching netball, active in your parish, caring for your kids. And sometimes you have to say no to the career ladder. This season of vocation requires this of me. There are often painful choices. But when we think about the alternative story, it's a story of dignity. We're made in the image of God. It's a mustard seed that formation in time allows to grow, like that year 9 teacher who didn't know the impact he was having on me. It is a story of maximising meaning, that I am called, that there is purpose to my life. It's a story that isn't at odds with science. Science takes things apart to explain how they work. Faith puts things together to explain what they mean. They're not at odds. Science explains the world that is. Faith in what you're doing, because humans are built to have meaning, is saying, what is the world as it ought to be? That world comes from telling an alternative story out of the gospel that Catholic educators are committed to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that challenge. We do have some time for some questions. It'd be lovely to engage with Tim with some of your questions. And our friends Attila and John have some microphones. They'll be coming around to take your questions. I might start off, if that's all right, Tim. We'll do a thought experiment. Just imagine that politics ran in your family and you could change one thing in national policy that would have the biggest impact on fairness in Australia. What would you do?
So I got into trouble for saying this on 3AW, Tom Elliott, son of John Elliott. But I advocated strongly for a wealth tax. We are like the only major Western nation that has no wealth tax. Of course, Tom Elliott said, you want to tax us while we're alive, you want to tax us when we're dead, how dare you, he went off. It's a funny interchange, actually, because I'd said that Gina Reinhardt and her children were in the news suing each other at that time, and I'd said, Gina doesn't even seem to believe in trickle down to her own children, you know. She wants to... And then Tom was going furious at me, son of John Elliott, and I said, you know, you went to Carey like I did, Tom. My father, who taught at Carey for 40 years, taught your father, John Elliott. I said, Tom, none of us should be defined by our fathers. You're worried about, you know, this wealth tax. Tom Elliott was so taken aback. He went silent for 30 seconds. It was funny live radio, actually. And people afterwards rang in, oh, you're just worried about losing your bit of your inheritance, Tom. But I actually think, you know, I am one who would support changing capital gains and negative gearing. I think my baby boomer generation have locked out our kids' generation impossibly. I think it's wrong. A wealth tax, I think, would be one of the ways. The common good demands someone pays for education and hospitals and defence and aid. We've got to pay for it. And for me, it would be a wealth tax.
Thank you, Tim. Let's take some questions from our audience. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tim. In the light of what you're talking about, sowing the seeds of the gospel, as then, as a system or as a group of leaders, what should be our measure of success then?
Yeah, look, one of my colleagues at CPX has written a wonderful little book, The Achievement Addiction. Justine Toe, her name is, and she's an Asian Australian, tiger mother, and having to achieve, and she, out of her Christian faith, has said, I realised at ATAR, she's got a PhD, how my whole identity was success academically, and how in The Achievement Addiction she's writing for Christian Catholic schools about actually what the measures of success should be. At the end of the day, we know that on any presentation night, speech night, it's basically the same kids at each year level going up 6 years who always get the prizes. Yet, there are kids who love God, love their neighbour, show selflessness in ways that really are the measure of success. That people, whatever their IQ, humans are very unequal in terms of natural abilities and how we measure success in the dominant story of the culture. But for Catholic formation, it seems to me the measure of success at the end of the day is this a person who loves God and loves their neighbour. That would be my measure of success.
Thank you. Just down the front.
Thanks, Tim, for a very thought-provoking and insightful analysis. I like the humane side of things. Just to add this poverty or the income disparity that is growing across the world, there is an alternate theory, alternate story in economic thought. You may have come across Mario Marizano's thinking. What I'm seeing, and that's what Mariano was mentioning, is the distinction between value creators and value extractors. In a way, the owners of Facebook's, Google's, Microsoft's are value extractors, because the value creators have already invested in the public internet or any of the open systems that were, just to take a technology example. So the society has actually started giving precedence to value extractors than value creators. And that has played out so badly in the COVID period, because the Amazon made more money out of tragedy, for example. Not intentionally though, but that's how the society panned out. So wealth tax is an overlay, but you are still actually encouraging value extractors, and the whole of global financial crisis was those who repackaged mortgage rather than those who actually humble families that took some loan in good faith. So I think there is something deeper that we have to do in society to bring more equality, equity, and the fairness that you rightly mentioned.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And we discovered in the pandemic that actually the people who we valued most were those often migrants in aged care homes, putting their lives on the line, nurses putting their lives on the line. That sense of the utter vulnerability of an invisible virus that showed the whole world is profoundly interdependent and we are utterly vulnerable. and who actually is adding real value. And how do we reward them? That was, I think, a moment. It's sort of past. People forget quickly, don't we, of really saying, who are the value creators? Look, we know in society there's always a care deficit. It's women who historically have always had to pick up the care in unpaid work, usually for kids and others. In the pandemic, we discovered how dramatic that care deficit is. We discovered who really needs to be on the front line and taking risks to care, real value. Suddenly there was this moment of, what is real value when it really matters? Teachers, the same. Absolutely, with kids learning, knocked about by pandemic, out of class teachers with EQ to deal with that care. And yet the value extractors are all those making the big dollars. There's a famous essay in The Atlantic by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, how America became uniquely stupid in the last 10 years. And it ranges over a range of things, but he said on social media, we were teaching, and he teaches at university level. In 2012, even though 18-year-olds had been on Facebook, they were sort of coping and participating and discussing in class. He said by 2012, I think it was, we noticed the 18-year-olds coming in were angry, brittle, wanting to shame, extraordinarily aware of their victimhood, always playing victim. As I said, the notion of Me Too and victims comes from Christianity. Who would prioritise the victim? It's a Christian concept, but victimhood. And he puts it down to the years when Facebook, Instagram and Twitter moved from just being communication, long scrolls of what your friends were doing, to adding the retweet, share, like buttons. He said it suddenly became performative. And that generation that are brittle had grown up only knowing performative stuff about who they are, status anxiety, whether they had enough likes. And he said it's completely, profoundly changed how they can cope, even in class, with ideas that they might go, well, that person who wrote Shakespeare, he was probably patriarchal, I'm not going to read Shakespeare. A whole anger and madness that had come. Yep, retweet, share, like, added extraordinary monetary value to these platforms. And the rewiring in kids, the way they can find their mob, turn on others, victimise others, literally, how dare you, and you're shocking, and say awful things, and get the dopamine release because they got 1,000 likes. People are with me. We've got to reassess the value extractors and real value creators.
Perhaps one more question. Just up the back, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, just completely off topic. 5 people that you could have for dinner, no one from the A team. Who would you want to spend dinner with tomorrow night?
That's a great question. So are we talking still alive? Still alive? Good. I really have grown very close, funnily enough, during COVID with Robert and Anne Mann. You might know that couple, and I'd certainly have both of them to dinner. I find their canvassing history and politics and moral depth are really impressive. Don't come from Christian faith background, but I'd certainly have them there. Look, I'm a tragic Essendon supporter, so I'd have James Hird there. Notwithstanding his disgrace, I I feel James Hird was the poetry in motion on the football field. Sorry to throw that one in. I absolutely now adore. It sounds a bit weird and creepy at my age to say this, but I'm really in love with Emma McKeon in the pool. 11 gold. Whenever she does a press conference, there's just this calm, dignity, humility. I just love that about her. I might add Ash Barty on that level. When you think, who at the top of their career retires at 65? We all had this, at 25. We all had this shock, she can't do it. I love that she exploded that success bubble. She just said, I've achieved it all. I can win a lot more money in tournament. What's the point? I really love that. So they're the living people I'd have.
Thank you, Tim. And on that note, I'd like to invite my colleague Lisa Crampton, Principal of St Monica's at North Parramatta, to deliver a vote of thanks on your behalf.
On behalf of everyone here in person tonight, as well as those watching via the live stream, thank you, Tim. It was well worth the wait. Thank you for acknowledging the work we do, the difficulties we face, the challenges that are presented to us each day, and the inequity of our financial remuneration. We believe the image of God is within each of the students we teach, the parents we engage with, and the teachers we collaborate with. As you say, we care, we love, and we stay. Not only do parents have a deep hunger for Catholic education, we have a deep hunger for Catholic education. We will keep doing the next right thing, and the next right thing, and the next right thing, because we are committed to continuing to live the alternative story of Catholic education. How can we make the world we share fairer? It takes faith, it takes imagination, and we know the hard work hasn't even started yet. We hope our bliss intersects with the world's need. Thank you, Tim, for the inspiration.
And now someone who loves an alternative narrative. I invite you forward, Greg Whitby, Executive Director of Schools, to give Tim a little gift on our behalf for sharing his evening with us. Would you like to come up to receive the gift, please, Tim?
You'll be pleased to know it's not alcohol. But here's a little gift, and we hope that every time you look at it, you'll think of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You might have a
Lovely.
little look. It's a local Aboriginal art.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you so much. Beautiful.
In case you ever don't try to stop the problem with somebody.
Great. Thank you.
Stay here just for a second. So on behalf of the Executive Director, I'd like to thank you for coming tonight. You may or may not be aware that today is a pretty special day for our Executive Director. It's Mr. Whitby's 70th birthday. And I thought it might be a nice way to end this evening to sing happy birthday to our boss. Would you join me in singing happy birthday? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Greg. Happy birthday to you. Hip hip. Hip hip. Hip hip. Happy birthday, Greg. Thank you. So to all of you, thank you for coming along. I hope you found the evening worthwhile and enjoyable, and it certainly is a great reinforcement of one of our priorities, that mission is countercultural. So Tim, thank you once again to our special guests, to all of you for coming out tonight, and to those who have joined us online, good night, God bless.